Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our new webinar, Drift Analysis of Handheld Measurement Devices. Let's have a look at the agenda of our today webinar. First, I would like to give you a motivation. Why do we do this and why is it needed, this drift detection? Then we provide some reasons for measurement differences and give some requirements for the reference materials to use. Then we go in detail and check how to do this drift detection in real life. Therefore, in order to do so, we have prepared an Excel sheet, a spreadsheet, which provides some basic means to do this kind of drift detection. Of course, we recommend you prefer professional services, and we will give you an overview of typical professional services that do this kind of drift detection. And at the end, I will explain why is Fogra not providing this color reference materials. Okay, there are two basic questions we would like to raise awareness for. The first question is, how does my device changes over time? It's important to see that measurement devices change over time, and we would like the printer to be aware of that magnitude. And another key question is, what are the differences among my devices? Because more and more print shops use more than one device, and it is important to see, inspect differences among the device maybe used in the prepress and the press room or in other circumstances. The main motivation which connects the dot is the theme of the PSD, which is printing the expected, which means to identify the expectation of your customer and then print it toward their needs and their expectations. And in order to do so, we kind of see that the predictable dissemination of that colorful content requires color measurements, because you can distribute colorful and print colorful, but if it should be predictable, that means based on what the creator sees on his or her soft proof or validation print or contract proof, you need to imply and use color measurements. And as I said, accurate and precise measurements are required for this kind of reproducible print results. Some prerequisites for the PSD certifications are therefore to have an external handheld color measurement device, not only a spectra proofer or something like this, because we would like to make sure that service providers are able to use their handheld devices and measure individual colors, and to be sure to double check, and if there's a question, not to print big targets, but just use a handheld measurement device to make individual inspection, to check about detailed problems and, of course, the routine daily work. And we require some means for drift detection. So we require a basic provision, and we will explain more about in this webinar what that means. If we talk about color measurement, it's important to differentiate accuracy and precision of measurements. You can see here an overview of the difference, precision and accuracy. And you see that precision relates to the repeatability and reproducibility of the device over time. Then is short-term, mid-term, and long-term repeatability. And if you change anything else beside time, like a different user or relocation, different samples, then we talk about instrument agreements, if it is among one instrument or series of one instrument. And if you compare different models, different manufacturers, then we talk about inter-model agreement or disagreement, if the differences are not so in agreement as we would like to have it. The contrary to precision is accuracy, and accuracy means what is the difference of the reading between that reading and a given true value. And we will see that while this might be the case in other physical measurements, for color measurements, there is no real true value, and therefore we will have some traceability. There are physical standards available. There are reflectance, primary and secondary standards. But we will see during the course of this webinar that there are practical implementations that lead to some differences which are unavoidable. And those tolerances come from different production processes, of course, of costs. You see there are 20,000 euro tabletop devices, and there are much cheaper handheld devices. And therefore, it is not avoidable to have zero differences. And the use case basically determines the required accuracy. So you need to know your application, and then you can see, okay, what is the required accuracy? Why this more or less worked quite well in the past, we see in the graphic arts that raising quality demands challenge this kind of fact that the required tolerances for proof or validation print or digital printing often comes in the level of uncertainty among different devices. Normally, in different other industries, it is required that the inter-instrument agreement is 10 times better than the tolerances you are speaking about. Here in the graphic arts, we learn that we should be happy if this is 50%. That means if you require a delta E of 2 or 3 for a paper match, then the differences should not be higher than 1.5. It is important when you inspect color measurement readings to differentiate between the diagnosis, that means to just see the readings and detect differences over time, for instance, and correction. You can think of it like a therapy kind of thing. One is to find out what's going on, and the other thing is to correct it. And here we differentiate further between measure-based therapy, so measurement-based correction, typically done by the manufacturer, where you correct implicit physical differences like photometric scales or wavelength errors, so measurement-based uh, differences. And they are use case driven corrections, which is often called tuning, where you have reference values for one specific media and you try to uh, tune your readings many times, not the measurements, the spectral reflectance curve, often the deduced and calculated LAB values. So what are typical reasons for measurement differences while we are sitting here basically? And we would like to differentiate between reasons caused by the manufacturers and caused by the users. And the reasons for differences caused by the manufacturers are typically the constructions and implementation differences within the defined requirements. Of course, we don't say that, of course, differences between an integrating sphere instrument and a 45.0 instrument are obvious. But we speak, even if we have a standard like 13655, if customers build devices according to their specification, overfilling, underfilling, aperture sizes, geometries for light and detection, and this kind of stuff. So if you use different implementation techniques and different optics, you will get some slight and minor differences among those different implementations and constructional aspects. The majority of differences are caused by the user, to be honest, and that is what we find here at Fogra quite often, like missing maintenance. So many manufacturers provide recertification, and we highly recommend to do so. We see that this kind of devices are not really handled and used as a measurement device. User errors by bad usage, it falls down or it will be carried around not very carefully or stored not very carefully. Or the user is using the incorrect settings, different modes for different applications, or different backers, white backers instead of black backers, or even to use within white maybe a fluorescent paper which appears white but which is not a conforming white backer. And if you see practical examples which have been provided here from X-Rite, you see that this kind of dirt is hitting this kind of plate, and you can see that this does not make the measurement device better. So please handle the device careful. Don't use it in rough environments, or like here, the white tile is kind of dirty. Or you can see here, the problem here relates to that if you move the average over the print, it's not laying flat perpendicular on this surface, so you have a not perfect angle anymore. Or if you try to fix something on your own, so you see this is something we would like to not see, not only during certification, but to not see over the entire lifetime, of course. When we say we would like to see drifts, we need to have some reference materials which we measure to see what are the changes. And we will see very easily that the readings are always marriage of the sample with its properties and the device with its properties. So that's why we always have two components, which is the reference material and the measurement device. So therefore, in order to just get the majority of the findings based traced back to the measurement, we need to have very rigid definitions of and requirements of our reference materials. Like it should be scratch resistant, light fast, and not show different big color differences when the temperature is changing. And it should be uniform, of course, which can be checked practically if you just do a lot of measurements and see what is the variance or the standard deviation of, let's say, the LA and B values. The handling is also very important. We recommend to use a dark storage placement at room temperature. So here are some examples. Painted samples are mostly preferred before printed samples because of the screening and uniformity issues. And that's why it is important to check also the consistency of your sample, of your reference material over time. That's very important, and we will go into this a little bit in more detail in the coming minutes. How to do it now? So, of course, the main way, the best way to go is to use a professional service, which is mostly provided by the manufacturer of the measurement devices. But it might also be provided by other professional services. If this is not yet available, we will have a proposal, a practical, abridged proposal for you to go that route and to go that path. Of course, use a stable reference as described, and at the minimum, we recommend to use the white tile which comes with the device. This is mostly doable, and mostly you can measure the white tile as you would measure a simple patch. For some devices, the white tile is kind of included and you can't use this as a external reference, but for the most of the devices, this is doable. And in addition, we recommend to use a further gray sample to check the photometric scale error, and a colorful sample like a green or pink patch with steep curves in the reflectance domain to check the sensor, the devices, for both reflectance wavelength problems and photometric scale lightness problems and differences. And an abridged solution is to use a printout or photo graph of basic color patches like the Kodak reference charts or a printed Fogra media wedge if you have. But again, it should be scratch resistant, it should be light fast, and this needs to be checked ahead of time. And Fogra provides an Excel spreadsheet, which we will explain in a few seconds, how you can use this, or how you can implement a drift detection on your own, on your facility, on your plant. Okay, this was already explained. This is helpful tool for you if you don't use yet a professional service, and the beta version of the Excel files will be provided at the Fogra homepage. The details will be summarized here. It provides for frequent measurements. It should be weekly or monthly, depends on your details of your uh, shop and your devices, and we will explain this later. Uh, the Excel file we provide is limited to 20 entries, so you should do a copy of it at the beginning, and then you can start with from scratch, so to speak, and I will explain this in a live in a few minutes. The measurement of a white tile, of course, is provided, and optional measurements of gray and the colored samples. We provide this concept of individual tolerances because if you want to detect something, you can see some color differences or lightness differences or chromaticity differences, but you would like to see, okay, when I should do something about, when I should do some corrective actions like a recertification or a cleaning if I can do it on my own. And therefore, we provide a mechanics here, which is called the coverage factor, which is based on a standard deviation, which you establish at the beginning when you do your reference readings. And we visualize color differences over time. And we also provide a second Excel file, which allows for the comparison of 2, 5, or up to 10 measurement devices if you have them in your place. Here you can see the start page where you see 20 entries for different dates. When you measure your reference chart, you put in a device number and a serial number at the beginning, and then you can put in the measurements over the time and see then the analysis. This is the reference measurement. So you're displayed for the white tile and the gray. We recommend at least 10 measurements, and this should be done very carefully on your white tile, on your white reference, and you can deduce from that 10 measurements something like the uniformity of your reference material and some more criteria which will come in the practical test in a few minutes. This is again the overview, the compact overview of the white tile, and the plus and the minus symbols here are there to present the additional information or just to not hide them. You see here the LAB average values of the white tile and the standard deviation of that reference established by means of the 10 readings at the beginning. Okay, we talked about that. The standard deviation that might be used as a starting point for the uncertainty assessment when you multiply this standard deviation by 2 or 3 and or more. We recommend 3 at the beginning to get some tolerance values for your own individual drift detection. Here are the measurements of the actual prints over time. Here we recommend 5 measurements, and you see after the measurements the average, the standard deviation, sigma, and the differences in L, A, and B. Again, this for the gray and green measurement reference or color reference. Here as an example for the colorful third kind of reference sample. This is a tolerance definition. You put in your coverage factor K, which is here 2. This is not a definition. You can play around with it. The important factor is that you find out the typical variances or standard deviations of your device over time, and you should deduce and establish those limits on your own. We recommend to use this K factor of 3. That means 3 times the standard deviation which you have established during your reference measurement. That should not be 3 or 10 measurements done on one spot 10 times after each other. It should be within the area of your patch, and it should be done over a time of 1 or 2 hours to really see what is the variance of your readings in that respect. And of course, it's important to see that those readings are not reflecting only the measurement device differences. They, of course, reflect the changes or the differences in the uniformity and in the together with that device. But this is important because it is practically what you have to deal with in your plant. Here is an example such an analysis and evaluation looks like over time. We have here 10 readings, and you see that the lightness increases over time for one device. On the right hand side you see delta A and delta B figures. That means the chromaticity drift. Finally, we have as I said, a second Excel file which allows you to compare, in this case, 5 devices. You put in the name and the serial number, and then you load the reference readings or the average of the reference readings which you have done before for the drift analysis, and that gives you an evaluation of the different devices among each other. And here it is okay or it's enough appropriate to just compare the reference readings, because if something changes over time, you will see it in the first analysis. You see the differences in the chromaticity. And with that, I will make a quick break here and will show you how this looks in practice. So when you download the two Excel files from the Fogra web page, you see this drift and comparison. So you open the drift file and it asks you to believe Fogra that we have no viruses in our macros, so please activate your macros, and it starts basically, and you will see this kind of window, which might also be the case that you get prompted or asked to load the Delta E2000 plugin, which is also used and required here. And in order to do so, you need to load this kind of plugin. Unfortunately, it has no name here, but this is under the add-ins, and you have to select it, and you can download it from the Fogra webpage also, and it looks like something like this. It's a version 3. Even if you get requested or required for version 2, open this kind of XLA file and you can use Delta E2000 in that area. So you see the reference measurements here. I am using an individual serial number of my i1 Pro here in this instance, and say, okay, first I start with a measurement of a reference, and you do the reference measurements in an external program or in the key wizard or whatever, and then use a clipboard, copy and paste to input here the LAB readings of your reference measurements. And additionally, you can do this for gray and green, or you can just not hide this kind of information. So if you have put that in, that data, the standard deviation will be calculated, and it gives you an indication of what are the variants, what are the differences in that readings. And those standard deviation reflect differences in the instrument, and very important also in your sample and the way you do the readings. Back to main page. So if you have the reference, you can then go to the different entries here. These are different times. You can see this here. If you go there, here you see different tables, and you say, okay, the examiner is Andy, and today we have the January 1st, 2013. So Maya were wrong, and we measure now our 5 repetitions, our sample 5 times in an external program, which is coming with your measurement device, and you copy and paste the values using, let's say, Excel or the needed tools with data massaging to get the values here in the Excel spreadsheet. And you can also adjust this, as I said, to 3. And this is a good starting point, and this will give you an indication of the tolerances. If you go back here and go to Analysis, you will see then, of course, when you have no entries here at the beginning, there's no differences, no signal, no information, but then you will see here more and more information and more values over the time, both for the delta L, for the lightness differences over time, and the chromaticity differences here for your devices. If you just have the white tile for this, if you have more patches, let's say for the patch 2 and patch 3. We will, of course, edit this over time if we get some critiques or improvements, some recommendations. And one of the improvement will be to put in this kind of tolerance limit, which you have defined before, that you not only see the differences, but also to get a burden or to get a tolerance limit here, which of course is subject to your individual requirements and needs. Yeah, that was a very brief, quick tour here. Again, you can see the analyzers directly. The reference is quite easy to go through. If you download the Excel file, you will see then the 20 entries here. This is the beta version, but this will be kind of self-explaining, hopefully. If not, don't hesitate to drop us a line or use the digital printing working group email list to communicate and share your findings. Another tool, as I said, or another tool, professional services are provided, let's say, by Basic Color. It is called Basic Color Catch. In this case, using the 3 samples, white, gray, and green. And you can see average and maximal differences in a nice professional way. You can print labels or report it automatically, and you will get here an evaluation report. It is important here to see that this is a diagnose, so you see differences, but it does not correct neither in the physical domain nor in the LAB domain. Further professional tools, let's say here for spectral check, where you have 4 samples here, and you can check it, and you can see also that the temperature is important, which will be used in the software to get diagnosed to see are you within the manufacturer required tolerances. Other tools are from Net Profiler, from Xrite. Here you can use both. You have some reference samples coming with it, and you can use either the diagnosis where you check the differences over time, but you can also apply a correction. So based on the differences you see in that procedure, it can be the Net Profiler applies a correction in the firmware of the device in order to correct the readings at the first place and then communicate the corrected readings to the application, to the user. Yeah, finally, I would like to give you an information why Fogra does not provide reference materials with LAB values, because you might have noticed that some consultants or other companies do so. First, it is important to see that there is no measurement device in the world that is recognized as such as a reference, the true value giving measurement devices. Unfortunately, there is not such a thing. Then we have to admit, we have to see that different devices, which are all conform to the tolerances and aim values defined in 13655, show not neglectable geometries. Not neglectable differences, sorry, because they use somehow different apertures or somehow different geometries or optics, and although they are within the tolerances, it might still be some small differences among them. If you use different devices and just average the LAB or reflectance spectra, that might not lead to physical useful spectra, because what we measure is the reflectance factor basically, and then all the other numbers are computed from it. So if you just use 3, 4 devices and average it and say this is what we call political averaging, then you can do it for certain circumstances, but this is not the right way to provide aim values for a device later to do a correction. Also important, reference samples are changing over time and with changing temperature. That's very important. So this is it's important if you have 2 or 3 devices, that will be quite easy or easier, because then if one device change and the other two don't, then you can kind of deduce that the device has some problems and the samples are the same. But if you see that if you have, for instance, 2, 3, 4 devices and all change all of a sudden in one direction, then you can see, okay, that might be an indication that the reference you are using, your sample, is changing and needs to be replaced. And for the professional services, the manufacturer provides an expiration date to make sure that this will be replaced as soon as possible or when required. Which is also often the case that there's a high risk of erratic measurements or interpretations, since the readings must be done very carefully. If you do this in the practical environment of a print shop, it is quite often the case that it's not 100% careful, and therefore there is a high risk if you do such a measurement and you compare your readings with provided aim values, that a correction might be better, or might be, yeah, as we call it, tuning here. This might be an improvement, if you call it, for this specified medium. So you measure this provided material like you see here on the right hand side from Vogelsong reference, and you see differences, okay, and then you might get a software which corrects this on an LAB basis or on a spectral basis, let alone how practical it is to use this software later on for your entire company. But still, if you do that tuning, it is quite difficult, because you might get an improvement, or you definitely will get an improvement for the tested material, for the used material. But due to the differences in geometry, as I said before, that most often leads to differences and for other substrates or ink on substrate combination, and therefore we we don't provide this kind of reference values, because we think, please handle your device with care and consult the services provided by the manufacturer. We are working with them to make sure that in the future there will be additional aims and provisions to provide measurement devices with a very good instrument and inter-model agreement. So let's sum it up. Measurement devices change over time. That's a very basic finding, but very important, and that's why we think that inspection is very important of your measurement devices. Handle it with care, but also see what are the differences, what might be potential differences over time. That what we sometimes find, that people it falls down and nobody reports it, then later you use that measurement and it provides some readings, but no one really had the courage to say, "Oh, okay, I had a problem with it. It falls down, and it might provide wrong readings." Now you don't find it, or you find it when it's too late. And we would like to avoid this. Sorry. Use the maintenance if provided, or maintenance contracts, or whatever kind of provisions the manufacturer provides, and drift detection to see, again, to answer the two important questions which we raised at the beginning. How much how does your device changes over the time, and what are the differences among your instruments in place. And don't forget to check your reference sample that might also be changing and mostly quicker than your instrument. So therefore have a look to both, and we explained how you can do this. With this, I'm happy and at the end of that webinar, please provide your findings to our intern who have done all the work in the background. It's Sebastian Prandl. And also use our digital printing working group email list to share your findings. I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bye bye.